Hey traders, welcome to the Thursday Market FX update. Starting with the dollar, we are pretty much in that same area where we're waiting for the confirmation of that dollar bull market, but we're starting to see some pretty promising signs, especially when we look at these lower timeframes and what's happened over the last day or two in terms of price action. When you go down into the hourly chart, you can see how we had a nice little push off these lows, very strong, promising impulse off the lows back towards dollar strength. And we've started to form a little bit of a corrective structure here. This last little move down has been a little bit confusing, but it still very much has that same structure of what we look for in terms of a running flat. The B wave itself is a little bit confusing. I wouldn't be surprised if this turns into a little bit of an expanding triangle, starts to reverse heading into the afternoon, and we get another leg higher up to kind of 91.60. A little bit early, a little bit speculative. That's kind of what I'm looking for here. It's also possible that all of this was already a complete little B wave structure, and we are now in the C wave already to the downside, in which case we should bottom out around about that 91 to 90 region before seeing more upside from there. So structurally speaking, we're looking like further upside. This is our first lower degree corrective structure following a larger degree correction, and it's starting to look like upside, although it has been really slow. Aussie dollar, US dollar, not much showing here. Kind of along the same lines where you have a pretty decent impulse of those highs, but the structure here is a little bit less confident in terms of downside potential, although it does still have that downside look to it, and you might just see another triangle form out of this. But we're seeing a little break and still forming a little bit of a head and shoulders structure that we were looking at previously. Higher time frame still looks good for downside. We're still in an area where it looks like we can turn here, and we could see some meaningful downside. So until we make new highs, we remain in the camp that what we're seeing here is the start of downside. As you can see, the head and shoulders, which is in that right shoulder forming now. If we continue to see a chop towards these lows, that will have confirmation of that head and shoulders top. And we will get confirmation of the pattern we were looking at in terms of price structure probably later on. But as you can see by the kind of waves that we're seeing here, impulse up, impulse down, impulse up, impulse down, probably looking at a little bit of an expanding triangle, something along those lines moving forward. New Zealand dollar, US dollar, kind of along the same lines, no real confirmation just yet. This big strong move to the downside was a good sign that we're heading lower, but that was countered by a pretty strong move to the upside, still lining up for a little bit of a break and retest of this rising wedge type structure. But again, no confirmation just yet as to exactly where we're heading from here. We're kind of in no man's land for now. You might see this develop into something kind of corrective in this region on the lower timeframes, where that is your A wave up. We get a bit of a chop lower and then another push higher, and that's a bit of an ABC before seeing further downside. But obviously, again, very early, very speculative. US dollar CAD making new lows, but again, we still have a little bit of MACD divergence on the lower timeframes. We're waiting for a move to the upside from this region, maybe see more downside, higher timeframes again. Probably go and test these lows at 120. That's the full structure, and that's kind of what looks like where we headed moving forward. But again, very close to that turning point. As you can see, the full turning point is around about 120.32. So not that far off. Just have to see what's going to develop over the next few days. Nothing really to trade there. US dollar yen continues to look like it's in correction for further upside down the line, but we're going to be here for some time. We should be here till August at the very least, but some fairly decent moves in between that up and down. We should go test 111 to the upside, but get some choppiness on the way there. Kind of similar picture with the US dollar Swiss. Would we like to see further upside in this US dollar Swiss? It's forming a little bit of a rounding bottom, as you can see, but it's going to take some time to play out as well. US dollar renminbi, again, looked like we got a nice decent move off these lows, fairly impulsive, but quite a strong counter to that move. So in this region, we just in kind of no man's land until further notice. Potentially starting to see a little bit of a lower degree structure here if we see a turn to the upside. So anything entry order wise above these highs works for me in terms of a trade. But with the structure that we're seeing here, we just need to give that time to play out. Copper still kind of in this rising wedge formation that we've seen, or that we've been looking at for a while now. Still looking good for downside. The lack of momentum to the upside is a good indication that what we're seeing is a turning point here. But again, these rising wedges aren't really reliable trades. It's just a kind of an indication of where we're sitting. When we look at the weeklies, we're sitting right near those 2011 highs, top of the pattern, which is a good indication that we may just break those 2011 highs and then pull back from there, because the structure is still in play for a move back down towards at least 2, maybe even lower moving forward. Pound Swiss, structurally speaking, higher time frames still look good. Lower time frames just taking their time to play out. But that being said, big pound interest rate announcement today, which will be a big one, and you could potentially shift our little structure that we had here into a little bit of a running flat type move, maybe even a contracting flat, given the price action that we've seen over the last few hours. You can see quite a strong pull down from there. So we should expect this to continue to the downside with the pound announcement or rate announcement heading later this afternoon, and pretty similar picture with the yen. Structure-wise, not ideal, not a great picture, but I still see a move to the downside. And as you can see, we get a little bit of a head and shoulders type structure forming here with your neck 150 region. But yeah, it's going to take some time to play out. We may go break the highs before we turn, but I still see a kind of triangular structure here, which will break to the downside moving forward. New Zealand dollar Swiss, again, very choppy. We still have our inch order below these lows, waiting for this to kind of solve itself into a full cleaner picture. But so far, looking good for downside. New Zealand dollar yen, kind of struggling to make new highs. Got to those old highs, impulse down, strong recovery impulse from there. But until we make new highs or new lows, there's not really a clean picture right now. So we're kind of just waiting to see where to from here. There, Euro pound, we were looking for this move down as a proper E wave. Looks like we got it. May develop into something more complex on the higher time frames, kind of chopping around. But these moves off these lows, or what could be deemed the E wave, are promising. We may start to see this accelerate again with that pound announcements later today. Euro yen still looking good for downside. UK oil making kind of new highs, a little bit higher than I expected. I'm starting to think this is actually a corrective structure for further oil strength, or may develop into a little bit of an expanding flat. So we're still looking for shorts. It's just changed the longer term view that we have, and we can start to look for short entries in this region, especially if we get a decent one in this region here. Bitcoin kind of chopping around, but looks like it's correcting for further upside. I remain cautious. So any decent downside move, you kind of basically just shifting your stop losses to all of these new lows. But any new low in this region, you really want to get out of the crypto and just be in a defensive point of view. And then Ethereum, obviously making new highs, but kind of losing momentum in this region as well. So you just need to be really cautious. A big move Ethereum's made from these lows at 2100. So you really just need to be cautious as to what's developing here. At the very least, you need to see a long drawn out corrective structure here. So I'll be inclined to take some profits in Ethereum and wait for confirmation of another leg higher before committing to holding longer term. Silver, another one that's just been frustrating, but still looks corrective for downside. This is a really big move off the highs, and now it just looks like we're in a zigzag correction for further downside. As you can see, touching on the 1-to-1 region, have to see how things develop here. Over the next few hours, we should start to see this accelerate. Otherwise, we'll have to change what we're seeing in the structure. Same with gold, heading up back towards new highs. Really choppy price action. It's actually starting to look like a little bit of a complex flat for further upside. But I want to just wait and see how things develop moving forward. The euro, we were looking for a little bit of a push higher. So getting a little bit of confirmation of that structure. We really want to start to see some downside from this region. If we do start to see that downside, that to me is conclusion that we are heading into that dollar bull market. So the next few hours are going to be really key for the structures that we're seeing in the dollar. Pound, I'd really like to see break lower here, given how long the structure's played out for. Really frustrating little structure that we've had here, but I still believe in the downside. Pound Oz, another one that still looks good for downside. We just need to give it some time. And as you can see, we started to get a little bit of downside here from this 108.50 region, and the rate announcement is going to be a big one moving forward. You might find that this is actually all developed into one big complex flat. So you have your impulse up, impulse down. This is your choppy section. Now you get an impulse down, you get a counter rally, and then from there, all of that is a corrective structure for downside and big downside at that. Pound New Zealand, we did say we're going to look for a little push up to this 195 region and then accelerate to the downside, and that's exactly what we've got in there. So this looks good, good confirmation of that pound weakness. Aussie New Zealand, we were looking for a little bit more of a corrective structure, but that has accelerated pretty strongly to the downside, kind of getting close to new lows. But anything that resembles any upside or flag, I would want to take to the upside, especially from this region now. So a little bit of choppiness in this region, a little bit of a flag, I would look to get long here. The higher time frame structure is still looking good. CAD Yen, CAN Swiss, kind of the same thing. We took an overextended flag play, and looks like it's going to make new highs. But this is why we keep our stops nice and wide with this strategy, because it gives you that time to take another leg lower and take break even, or potentially see a bit more of a topping pattern here. Still kind of in line with a little bit of a expanding flat, expanding triangle in this region, maybe a double top type structure, but obviously very early, very speculative. We have to wait and see how things are going to play out. So in terms of strategy for the rest of the week, basically just watching to see how the pound and the dollar are going to respond to economic events, and not much else from there. Obviously just keeping an eye on this Aussie New Zealand trade for now. So yeah, very, very frustrating week in terms of price action. Every little impulse we get to the upside gets countered by another impulse. But just zooming out to the higher time frame structures, I still think we are in good speed. We're looking really good in terms of what to expect moving forward. I still see Aussie, New Zealand popping higher, and basically looking at the dollar, I still see the dollar popping lower here. The euro popping lower, the dollar getting stronger. Higher time frame structures still look good, and we are just waiting for confirmation of that. And again, we just continue to see these head and shoulders type structures forming, which is a good sign that we are seeing a turn in the market and a dying off of momentum. Look at this MACD. You're seeing this MACD dying off. Silver, still looking at this as a big running flat. The C wave just waiting to complete before we see downside, and gold kind of starting to see this as less of an expanding lower degree flat and more of a higher degree running flat here. So a little bit of upside in gold is not it's not going to remove us from the structure that we are seeing. We can still see kind of 1850 on gold, 1860, and that's still part of a big running flat structure here. And you might see gold rally a little bit on volatility around the pound, Scottish election. There's a lot of things that could happen over the rest of the week that could go into a little bit of a risk off and see things fade a little bit. So we'll be watching for this pretty closely, but so far so good. Looking for continuation to the downside. Higher time frame still confirming that. It's cool, guys. Have a good day. We'll chat again tomorrow.